Welcome to Go with the Code. In this video you will learn what is ASP.NET Core Web API and how to use it. The Web API application in this video uses controllers. The examples are written in C#, but as always you should know what you do before you do it, because you do it at your own risk. Web API is an application programming interface used to create RESTful HTTP services. It is an application programming interface for other applications. You can create a client application that, for example, retrieves and sends data to the database via the Web API server application. Web API returns data in JSON or XML format. It does not return a view. Commonly used HTTP methods are HTTP POST, GET, PUT, and DELETE. You can use these HTTP methods for basic CRUD operations. Consider security before publishing your Web API server application to the Internet. When you publish your Web API application to the Internet, your application is sensitive to attacks. That is why you should always use authentication, authorization, and an HTTPS connection between the client and the server. Never store passwords in plain texts, and never allow access to the database server from the Internet. Model View Controller architecture is commonly used. It separates an application into three main logical components: the model, the view, and the controller. When the user clicks the button from the application calls controller. The controller handles user interactions. It also directs traffic to models and views. A model contains the data structure. It manages the data, logic, and rules of the application. A view instead shows user interface of the application. It only displays information. The controller passes data to the view, and the view presents data to the browser for display. Because Web API does not contain views, there are some differences between MVC and Web API applications. The picture above shows what happens in an MVC application when the user clicks a button in a view to retrieve data from the database. The picture below instead shows what happens when a client application retrieves data from a Web API server application that uses a database. You can also use minimal Web APIs in .NET 6. Minimal APIs do not support controllers. Minimal APIs are great for lightweight Web API applications. They contain the minimum set of components needed to build an application. You should consider if you need controllers in your Web API application before you create a new project. In this video, we will use controllers. Creating a new Web API project is easy. At the time of making this video, the latest stable version of .NET Core was .NET 6. Make sure you are using the latest stable version of .NET Core in your application. To create a new project, select ASP.NET Core Web API project template and click Next. Give a name and location for your project, and after that click Next. Make sure that Configure for HTTPS, Use Controllers, and Enable Open API support are selected. We will use Swagger and JSON Web Token authentication in this video. You could also use Windows Authentication, Basic Authentication, or Microsoft Identity Platform. And finally, click Create to create a new Web API project. Next we look at the controller class. The name of the controller class must end with the word controller. In this example, the controller name is Person Controller. Controllers in a Web API project are classes that derive from the controller base class. The controller base class does not support views. Authorized attribute without any arguments only checks if the user is authenticated. You can also allow access to the controller for specific roles. In this video, we use token replacement in attribute roots at the controller level. This means that the tokens controller and action are replaced by the controller name and the action name. There is a list of behaviors provided by the API controller attribute. Next, we compare IActionResult and ActionResult of T with each other. IActionResult and ActionResult of T are both appropriate when multiple return types are possible. IActionResult and ActionResult of T represent various HTTP status codes. There are many similarities between them, but they are used in a slightly different way. The ActionResult of T enables you to return a type deriving from ActionResult or return a specific type. You don't have to specify a produces respond type attribute. We use it in this video to let Swagger know the endpoint's HTTP status codes. Web API tries to get a value from a query string parameter if the parameter is a simple type. For complex types, Web API tries to read the value from the request body. You can force Web API to read a complex type parameter from the query string using the FromQuery attribute. You can also force the Web API to read the simple type parameter from the request body using the FromBody attribute. Query string parameters are not encrypted even if you use HTTPS protocol in your application. That is why you should never send sensitive information in query string parameters. You can use data annotations or Fluent validation in your ASP.NET Core Web API application. Fluent validation supports manual validation and automatic validation. It is not recommended to use auto-validation for new projects. Look more from the Fluent validation website. JSON Web Token is an open standard that defines a compact and self-contained way for transmitting information between parties as a JSON object. The information is signed using symmetric or asymmetric keys. Always use HTTPS connection when you use JSON Web Tokens to encrypt the traffic between client and server. JSON Web Tokens consist of 3 parts separated by dots, which are header, payload and signature. In the picture below, you can see the configuration that we will use in this video. We will use symmetric keys. JSON Web Token Bureau performs authentication by extracting and validating a token from the authorization request header. We will use both authentication and authorization in this video. To make authentication work, you need an endpoint that authenticates a user. Here is the code of the authentication controller class that we will use in this video. The action receives username and password. If username and password are valid, user claims are added to the security token. You can use existing claim types or create custom claim types. Try to keep claim types as simple as possible. You don't want security tokens to be huge because they are sent over the network. In this example, if the user is not found, the action will return HTTP status not found, otherwise the action returns user's JSON Web Token. In this example, we have created a new endpoint that returns the current user's claims. Only members of the admin group can access this endpoint. If the authorization attribute is not specified, the claims will not work. Like Razor Pages, also ASP.NET Core Web API supports dependency injection. Next we look at Swagger. Swagger is a project used to describe and document RESTful APIs. For security reasons, use Swagger only in a development environment. It allows both computers and humans to understand the capabilities of a web API without direct access to the source code. Swagger generates a YAML or JSON file that contains a detailed description of your Web API application, you can create a new client application using this file. Here you can see Swagger user interface from the application that we will use in this video. The application contains 4 controllers and 9 endpoints. Swagger is great for testing Web API server applications without making a client application. Swagger requires you to add JSON Web Token Bearer authorization to your application before you can test authentication with Swagger. To make authentication work, install Swashbuckle to your project. You have to also add OpenAPI security scheme and requirements to your program class. Here is an example of the configuration that we will use in this video. After authorization is added, you can see Authorized button in the user interface. Next we will look at how to document your Web API application. You can use Swashbuckle for generating Swagger documents from your Web API application. Swashbuckle lets you, for example, display XML comments in the Swagger user interface. To make documentation work, you have to include XML comments file location. We also extend the Swagger generator with filters that can modify operations after they are generated. Here the authorized check operation filter class adds unauthorized and forbidden HTTP status codes to the Swagger document if the controller requires authorization. For security reasons, use Swagger only in a development environment. And finally, we look at Postman. Postman is an API platform for building and using APIs. Instead of using Swagger, you can also use Postman to test your Web API server application. Swagger uses interface is an alternative to Postman. Postman has a free version which you can download to your computer. You can also use Postman on the web. Postman is easy to use and it does not require as much configuration as Swagger. Next we will look at the application. Let's begin. The Web API server application contains controllers, the business logic layer, and the data access layer. The business logic layer contains request and response models. The data access layer is the same that we used earlier with Razor pages. The only difference is that we have added 2 new tables to the database, which are the API user table and the role table. The role table contains user roles. The API user table contains those users who can log in to the application. Never save passwords to the database as plain text. There is a relationship between the API user table and role table. The authentication settings can be found from program class. We use JSON Web Token Bearer authentication with Swagger. Add authentication and authorization capabilities to program class to make them work. JSON Web Token key, issuer and audience, and also the database connection string can be found from app settings file. When we start the application, the Swagger graphical user interface opens. Swagger acts like the client application. We can use it to test our Web API server application. Swagger contains the list of controllers that we have in our Web API server application. Each controller has at least one endpoint, which is called an action. The API user controller has an action called getUser. We can find the action under the controller class. Swagger generates a JSON file that contains a detailed description of our Web API server application. We can copy the content of the file and paste it to the Swagger editor. After that, we can generate the code for our client application. First, we just have to select the language that we will use. Swagger editor returns us a code for our client application. Next, we will look at the authentication. As we saw earlier, we have two roles in the database, the admin role and the customer role. Only those users with the admin role can access the API user controller. Only those users with the customer role or the admin role can access the person controller. All authenticated users can access the biological sex controller to retrieve all genders from the database. The authentication controller is open for all. If we try to retrieve a person with a specific ID from the database, we will get an unauthorized error because we are not authenticated to the application. The getById action tries to retrieve a person with a specific ID using the query string parameter. The parameter value is ID. The type is integer. For security reasons, do not try to send information such as social security number in a query string parameter. The authenticate action inside the authentication controller requires both the username and the password. If we try to log in without the password, we will get an error message that the password is required. The authenticate action tries to retrieve the username and password from the request body. When we log in to the application, the authenticate action tries to retrieve the user from the database. In this example, we use Dapper. If the user is found, the action tries to verify the user's password. We use the password hasher class. In this example, we have changed the default iteration count to over 300,000. If the password is valid, the user information is added to the user claims. We use both the custom claim types and the default claim types. And finally, the authenticate action returns the user's web token. Because the web token isn't encrypted, you should always use an HTTPS connection in your application. We can use the web token to authenticate the user to the Swagger. Because the user is in the admin role, the user can get the current user's claims from the application. And next, we will look at the postman. You can also use Postman to send HTTP GET, POST, PUT or DELETE operation to your Web API server application. You just need the address of your Web API server application, the controller name and the action name. The HTTP method is POST. If the username or the password is incorrect, we will get a not found status code. If the username and password is correct, we will get the user's JSON web token that contains the claims. We can use the web token, for example, to retrieve data from the database. And also we need the controller name, the action name, and in this case the HTTP method is get. And now we are ready. Until we code again. Bye.